The marble floors of the stone mansion gleamed under the late afternoon sun, each surface reflecting the obsessive perfection Gabriel demanded from his world. I moved through the corridors with practiced invisibility, my cleaning cartwheels silent on the expensive rugs, my presence as unremarkable as the furniture I polished. That's exactly how I needed it to be. Gabriel Stone didn't hire ordinary housekeepers. Every employee underwent background checks that could expose a ghost's secrets, yet somehow my fabricated identity had passed his scrutiny. Sarah Mitchell, the timid domestic with impeccable references and no family connections, existed only on paper. Grace Harmon, the woman I truly was, had died 6 months ago in a Chicago alley, at least according to the forged death certificate that had cost me everything I owned. I dusted the bookshelves in his private study, my hands steady despite the anxiety that never quite left my chest. Through the window, I could see Gabriel in the garden, his phone pressed to his ear, his expression carved from stone as he conducted business I preferred not to imagine. He was younger than I expected for someone with his reputation, perhaps 35, with dark hair that he wore slightly too long, and eyes that seemed to calculate the value of everything they observed. "Miss Mitchell," his voice came from behind me, and I nearly dropped the crystal paperweight in my hand. I turned, forcing my expression into appropriate subservience. "Mr. Stone, I didn't hear you come in. That's the point of these floors." He moved past me to his desk, barely acknowledging my presence. "I'm expecting visitors tonight. Make sure the dining room is prepared for 8. "Of course, sir." He glanced up then, his gaze lingering on me for a moment too long. My pulse quickened, but I kept my face neutral. After 6 months, I'd almost convinced myself that my disguise was perfect. Brown contacts hiding my distinctive green eyes, hair dyed mousy blonde and pulled back in a severe bun, reading glasses I didn't need perched on my nose. The real Grace had been vibrant, passionate, always ready to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. Sarah was a shadow, deliberately forgettable. "You've been with us for how long now?" Gabriel asked, his tone casual, but something in his posture suggested the question was anything but. 6 months this week, sir." "And you're satisfied with the arrangement?" "Very much so. Thank you for the opportunity." He nodded dismissively, already turning back to his computer. I retreated from the study, my heart pounding. That was the longest conversation we'd ever had. In 6 months, Gabriel Stone had barely looked at me twice. His sudden interest couldn't be coincidence. I finished my duties with mechanical efficiency, my mind racing through possibilities. Had someone recognized me? Had the forged documents finally revealed their flaws? Or was I simply paranoid, seeing threats in innocent questions? The mansion emptied as evening approached. The other staff members departed for their homes, but I lingered, using the excuse of extra preparation for Gabriel's dinner party. In reality, I was waiting for the moment when I could slip away to the one place that mattered more than my safety. At 7 o'clock, I changed into street clothes in the staff quarters and left through the service entrance. The bus stop was 3 blocks away, and I kept my head down as I walked, hyper-aware of every car that passed, every stranger who glanced my way. The constant vigilance was exhausting, but it had kept me alive this long. The Mercy Street shelter occupied a converted church in the city's forgotten quarter, its Gothic architecture now housing the broken and abandoned. I signed in using yet another false name, and the volunteer at the desk waved me through with a tired smile. She knew me as a regular visitor, nothing more. Grayson was in his usual corner of the children's room, a small figure hunched over a puzzle he never seemed interested in completing. At 7 years old, he should have been energetic, curious, alive with questions. Instead, he sat in silence, his dark eyes holding an emptiness that shattered something in my chest every time I saw him. "Hey, sweetheart." I settled onto the floor beside him, keeping my movements slow and predictable. "Can I help with your puzzle?" He didn't respond. He never did. According to his file, the one I'd memorized before destroying my access to the social services database, Grayson hadn't spoken in 4 months, not since the raid that had freed him from the trafficking ring. The physical wounds had healed, but the invisible ones had only deepened with time. I picked up a puzzle piece, a fragment of blue sky, and studied it carefully. This one looks like it goes here. I placed it gently, not quite connecting it, leaving space for him to finish if he chose. We sat together for an hour, the silence between us comfortable in a way that conversation never could have been. I told him about my day in quiet murmurs, editing out anything that might frighten him, creating a narrative of normalcy I wished could be true. Sometimes his eyes followed my movements. Tonight, he even reached for a puzzle piece himself, his small fingers trembling slightly as he placed it. "That's perfect," I whispered. "You're so good at this." His lips moved, forming a shape that might have been a word, but no sound emerged. Still, it was more than I'd seen before, a tiny crack in the walls he'd built around himself. "It's okay," I assured him. "You don't have to talk. I'm just happy to sit with you." But even as I spoke comfort to Grayson, my own anxiety wound tighter. The dinner party at the mansion would be starting soon. I needed to return, to maintain my cover, to avoid giving Gabriel Stone any reason to look at me more closely than he already had. "I have to go soon," I told Grayson softly. "But I'll come back tomorrow. I promise, I'll always come back." His hand shot out, gripping my sleeve with desperate strength. Those empty eyes suddenly focused, locked onto mine with an intensity that stole my breath. "Please." The word was barely a whisper, rough from disuse, but unmistakably real. "Don't leave." Tears burned my eyes. 4 months of silence, shattered by 2 words that held the weight of a child's entire world. I covered his hand with mine, squeezing gently. "I'm not leaving you," I promised, knowing even as I spoke that it might be a lie I couldn't keep. "I'm here. I'll always be here." But I didn't see the man watching from the doorway, Gabriel Stone's head of security, his phone raised to capture everything. I didn't know that my one moment of genuine emotion had just exposed every secret I'd killed myself to protect. The silent witness had finally spoken, and his words would shatter the fragile safety I'd built from lies. Marcus Chen had been Gabriel Stone's head of security for 8 years, long enough to develop an instinct for deception that bordered on supernatural. When his employer had casually mentioned that the new housekeeper seemed different and asked for discreet surveillance, Marcus had expected to find evidence of theft, corporate espionage, perhaps an affair with a rival's associate. What he hadn't expected was to find himself in a children's shelter at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday evening, watching Sarah Mitchell transform into someone else entirely. He'd followed her from the mansion with professional detachment, maintaining distance, blending into the urban landscape with practiced ease. But now, crouched behind the shelter's donation bins with his phone angled through a gap in the window blinds, Marcus felt something uncomfortable twist in his chest as he watched the housekeeper cradle a traumatized child with a tenderness that seemed to physically hurt her. The audio on his phone was clear enough to catch every word she murmured to the boy, every gentle reassurance. This wasn't an act. Whatever else Sarah Mitchell might be hiding, her compassion for this broken child was absolutely real. When the boy spoke, those 2 desperate words that Marcus's audio equipment captured perfectly, he saw Sarah's composure crack. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she made a promise she probably couldn't keep, and Marcus suddenly hated his job with an intensity that surprised him. But Gabriel Stone paid him to be thorough, not sentimental. Marcus recorded another 10 minutes of footage before Sarah finally extracted herself from the boy's grip, promising again to return tomorrow. He watched her wipe away tears, rebuild her careful disguise of mediocrity, and slip back into the role of invisible domestic. He followed her back to the mansion, his mind already composing the report Gabriel would demand. The dinner party was in full swing when Sarah entered through the service door, and she moved immediately to the kitchen, helping the catering staff with practiced efficiency. To anyone else, she would have seemed exactly what she claimed to be, but Marcus had learned to see through masks. He noticed the slight tremor in her hands, the way she positioned herself to maintain visual access to all exits, the unconscious way she touched her wrist where a watch should have been, but wasn't. These were the habits of someone living under an assumed identity, someone with training that extended far beyond housekeeping. Gabriel was holding court in the dining room, entertaining associates whose names never appeared in legitimate business directories. Marcus entered quietly, waiting for the appropriate moment to request a private word. His employer excused himself with practiced charm, following Marcus to his study. "Well?" Gabriel settled behind his desk, his expression unreadable. "Is our Miss Mitchell stealing the silverware?" "No, sir." Marcus pulled out his phone, queuing up the footage. "But she's definitely not who she claims to be." He played the video without commentary, watching Gabriel's face for reactions. His employer's expression remained neutral through most of the footage, but something shifted when the child spoke. A muscle tightened in Gabriel's jaw, and his fingers stilled on the desk's surface. "The boy's name is Grayson Pierce," Marcus explained when the video ended. 7 years old. He was recovered from a trafficking operation 4 months ago. According to the shelter's records, Sarah Mitchell started visiting him 3 months ago, shortly after she began working here. Trafficking. Gabriel's voice was flat, carefully emotionless. And our housekeeper's interest in this child? That's where it gets interesting. Marcus pulled up the background check they'd run 6 months ago. Sarah Mitchell exists on paper. She has a social security number, employment history, even a birth certificate. But dig deeper, and it all falls apart. The references are real people who confirm hiring her, but their descriptions don't quite match. The previous addresses check out, but neighbors don't remember her. She's a ghost who learned to cast a shadow. And her real identity? Still working on that, but I did find something. Marcus displayed a missing person report from Chicago. Grace Harmon, 28, former social services caseworker. She disappeared 6 months ago after allegedly witnessing evidence of trafficking connections within her own agency. There was an investigation, then nothing. The case went cold. He pulled up a photo of Grace Harmon. Vibrant red hair, bright green eyes, a smile that suggested she'd never met an authority she didn't question. Next to it, he placed a screenshot from tonight's footage, showing Sarah Mitchell's face caught in an unguarded moment as she comforted the child. "Remove the disguise," Marcus said quietly. "And I'd bet my career they're the same woman." Gabriel studied the images in silence, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. The dinner party continued without him, laughter and conversation drifting through the mansion's halls, oblivious to the revelation unfolding in the study. "The trafficking operation that held the boy," Gabriel finally said. "Do we have details?" Marcus hesitated. This was where things became complicated in ways that had nothing to do with a housekeeper's false identity. The investigation was handled by a joint task force. They made 14 arrests, but the operation's leadership disappeared before the raid. The case files are sealed, but I have contacts who can access them if you want to know more. I want to know everything. Gabriel's tone left no room for argument. And I want to know why Grace Harmon chose my home to hide in. There's another possibility we should consider. Marcus chose his words carefully. She might not have chosen your home randomly. If she's investigating trafficking connections, and if those connections extend into certain business circles. He let the implication hang in the air. Gabriel's empire touched many industries, some more legitimate than others. The associates currently eating dinner in his home had their own diverse portfolios, and not all of them would pass ethical scrutiny. "You think she's here to spy on me?" It wasn't a question. "I think she's here to hide," Marcus corrected. "But that doesn't mean she isn't also watching. A woman like that, with her background, wouldn't stop fighting just because she's in hiding. She'd look for ways to continue her work, even from inside enemy territory. Gabriel stood, moving to the window that overlooked the garden. The party had spilled outside, his guests enjoying the evening air and expensive wine. From this vantage point, he could see everything: the careful social choreography, the subtle power plays, the performance of civility masking ruthless calculation. "The boy spoke to her," he said suddenly. 4 months of silence and she got him to speak. "Yes, sir. That's not manipulation. That's genuine connection." Gabriel turned back to face Marcus, his expression unreadable. Someone traumatized enough to stop speaking doesn't break that silence for someone he doesn't trust absolutely. Marcus remained silent, unsure where his employer's thoughts were leading. "Bring her to me tomorrow morning," Gabriel ordered. "Not as a suspect or prisoner, as a guest. Tell her I want to discuss her future employment in a more suitable capacity. And Marcus?" His eyes hardened. "Make sure she understands that running would be inadvisable. If she truly cares about that child, she'll want to hear what I have to say." "And if she runs anyway? Then we'll know she's more afraid of me than she is invested in saving him." Gabriel returned to his desk, already dismissing Marcus. "But I don't think she'll run. People like Grace Harmon don't abandon the children they've promised to protect. It's both their greatest strength and their most exploitable weakness." Marcus left the study with the uncomfortable feeling that he'd just set something irrevocable in motion. He'd followed many people over the years, gathered evidence of countless secrets, helped Gabriel Stone maintain his empire through information and intimidation. But tonight felt different. Tonight, he'd exposed someone who actually deserved protection, and he wasn't sure if Gabriel intended to offer it or exploit it. Back in the servants' quarters, Grace Harmon, still wearing Sarah Mitchell's face, lay awake in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and replaying Grayson's words in her mind. "Don't leave." 2 words that had reopened every wound she'd tried to seal shut, reminded her why she'd sacrificed everything, why she couldn't stop fighting no matter how dangerous it became. She didn't know that her secret was already unraveling. She didn't know that Gabriel Stone was even now reading through her real case files, learning about the trafficking network she'd exposed, the corruption she'd uncovered, the price she'd paid for trying to save children nobody else wanted to protect. She didn't know that tomorrow morning, everything would change. The silent witness had spoken, and his words had started a chain reaction that would either save them all or destroy them completely. There was no middle ground. No safe compromise. Only the truth, waiting to emerge from the shadows where it had been hiding for far too long. I knew something was wrong the moment Marcus Chen appeared at my door, instead of sending his usual impersonal text about schedule changes. Gabriel Stone's head of security never delivered messages in person unless the situation demanded his particular brand of courteous intimidation. "Miss Mitchell." He stood in the hallway with perfect posture, his expression professionally neutral. "Mr. Stone requests your presence in his study at 9 o'clock. It's regarding your employment status." My stomach dropped, but I kept my face carefully blank. "Of course. Should I be concerned?" "That depends entirely on you." Marcus's eyes held something I couldn't quite read, not hostility, but not friendliness either. "I'd advise against being late. And Miss Mitchell?" He paused at the doorway. "Mr. Stone knows about the shelter. He knows about the boy." He left before I could respond, before the panic could fully register on my face. I stood frozen in my tiny room, my mind racing through impossible calculations. How much did Gabriel know? Just about my visits to Grayson, or everything? And more importantly, what did he plan to do with that information? I had 30 minutes to decide whether to run or face whatever confrontation awaited me in that study. 30 minutes to weigh Grayson's safety against my own, to calculate whether Gabriel Stone was the kind of man who would use a traumatized child as leverage. In the end, it wasn't really a choice at all. I'd promised Grayson I would come back. I'd looked into his empty eyes and sworn I wouldn't abandon him. That promise meant more than my safety, more than my carefully constructed false identity, more than anything. At exactly 9 o'clock, I knocked on Gabriel's study door. "Come in, Grace." He used my real name like a weapon, and I felt the last remnants of Sarah Mitchell's disguise crumble away. I entered the study with my spine straight, refusing to cower even as my pulse hammered against my ribs. Gabriel sat behind his desk, several folders spread before him. I recognized my own face staring up from what looked like official documents. My real face, captured in the photo from my social services ID badge. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit, please." I sat, cataloging details with the observational skills that had once made me excellent at my job. Gabriel looked tired, as if he'd been awake most of the night. Coffee stained one of the folders. His usual meticulous appearance was slightly disheveled, his tie loosened, his sleeves rolled up. This wasn't a man who'd casually discovered an employee's deception. This was a man who'd spent hours researching, thinking, possibly even caring about what he'd learned. "Grace Harmon," he began, reading from the documents. 28 years old, bachelor's degree in social work from the University of Chicago, master's in child psychology. Employed by the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services for 4 years, with an exemplary record of successful interventions and child placements. Until 6 months ago, when you allegedly witnessed evidence that connected several DCFS officials to a trafficking network operating out of supposedly legitimate foster care agencies. I said nothing, waiting for him to continue. "You tried to report it through proper channels. Your supervisor destroyed your evidence and threatened your professional license. You went to the police, but the connections ran too deep. Someone in the department tipped off the traffickers. They sent people to your apartment to silence you, but you weren't there. You'd already destroyed your digital footprint, withdrawn your savings, and disappeared." Gabriel looked up from the documents, his dark eyes studying me with an intensity that made me want to squirm. "The official story is that you died in a random mugging 2 weeks after you went missing. There's a death certificate, a cremation record, everything properly filed. But I'm looking at a dead woman who's been polishing my bookshelves for 6 months. Are you going to turn me in?" I kept my voice steady, refusing to show the fear coursing through me. "Turn you in to whom?" Gabriel leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "The corrupt system you exposed? The trafficking network you threatened? Or perhaps to my business associates, some of whom might have uncomfortable connections to the people who want you dead?" The implications in that statement made my blood run cold. "You know who they are." "I know of them. There's a difference." He tapped one of the folders. "The trafficking operation that held Grayson Pierce, the boy you've been visiting, was funded through a network of shell companies and offshore accounts. Very sophisticated, very careful, designed to be untraceable. The kind of operation that requires significant resources and protection from people in positions of power. And you have connections to these people. Some of my business partners have investments that overlap with entities that may have ties to questionable activities." Gabriel's carefully neutral phrasing was its own damning admission. "I don't ask detailed questions about their other ventures, and they return the courtesy regarding mine. So you're telling me that the man whose home I've been hiding in is connected to the same network that wants me dead?" Bitter laughter escaped me. "That's almost poetic. I'm telling you that the world is more complicated than your social worker's idealism wants to believe." Gabriel's tone hardened slightly. "I'm also telling you that not everyone in that world is equally complicit. Some of us maintain boundaries, lines we won't cross regardless of profit potential. And where's your line? How many trafficked children are acceptable before it becomes too morally uncomfortable for your taste?" His hand slammed down on the desk with enough force to make me flinch. "None. 0. That is my line, Grace. I've built my empire on many questionable foundations, but I have never, will never, tolerate anything involving children." The fact that some of my associates don't share that scruple has always been a point of tension. I studied him carefully, trying to determine if this was manipulation or genuine conviction. Gabriel Stone hadn't built his reputation by being soft or sentimental. Men in his position didn't survive by caring about the suffering of others. Yet something in his expression suggested this particular issue struck a nerve I hadn't expected him to have. "Why am I here?" I asked finally. "If you're going to threaten me, just do it. If you're going to trade me to your associates for whatever political capital I'm worth, get it over with. But don't pretend this is a conversation between equals, because we both know it isn't. You're here because yesterday evening, you made a 7-year-old boy speak for the first time in 4 months." Gabriel pulled out his phone, and my stomach sank as he played Marcus's footage. I watched myself promise Grayson I wouldn't leave, saw the tears I'd tried to hide, heard the desperation in that child's voice as he begged me to stay. "That child trusts you," Gabriel said quietly, "which means you're either the most committed undercover operative I've ever encountered, or you actually give a damn about saving him. I'm betting on the latter. What do you want from me?" "Information, cooperation, and possibly your help preventing something that even I find unconscionable." He opened another folder, this one containing photographs that made bile rise in my throat. Children's faces, dozens of them, attached to what looked like auction listings. This came to my attention last night. One of my associates, and I use that term loosely, is organizing an event in 3 weeks. A private auction for what he's calling premium acquisitions. I wasn't supposed to see these details, but I have people who report things they think I should know about. I couldn't look away from those photographs. Some of the children looked drugged, their eyes vacant. Others showed pure terror. All of them were merchandise in someone's sick business transaction. "I want to stop this," Gabriel continued, "but I can't do it through normal channels without exposing my own organization to scrutiny I can't afford. I need someone who understands how these networks operate, who knows the systems they exploit, who can help me dismantle this particular operation without bringing everything else down with it. You want me to help you commit selective heroism so you can continue profiting from your other crimes with a cleaner conscience." The words came out harsher than I intended, but I was too angry to care. "You want to save these specific children while maintaining business relationships with people who'll just victimize different children tomorrow." "I want to do what's possible within the constraints of reality," Gabriel corrected. "I can't dismantle the entire trafficking industry. I can't arrest every corrupt official or eliminate every predator. But I can stop this specific auction, save these specific children, and sever my connections to the people facilitating it. That's not perfect justice, but it's more than anyone else is offering to do." I stared at him, torn between disgust at his pragmatism and desperate hope that he might actually mean what he was saying. "And if I help you, what happens to me afterward?" "That depends on what you want. You can disappear again with a new identity that won't fall apart under scrutiny. You can have money, resources, protection from the people hunting you. Or..." He paused, his expression shifting to something almost uncertain. "Or you can stay and help me figure out how to do more than just put out individual fires." "Stay? Here? Working for you?" "Working with me. As a consultant on child welfare issues. God knows I need someone to audit my partner's activities more carefully." Gabriel's mouth twisted in something that might have been self-directed disgust. "I've been willfully blind to certain details because acknowledging them would require action I wasn't ready to take. You've already proven you're willing to sacrifice everything to protect children. I'm offering you resources that could make that sacrifice count for something bigger." It was insane. Every instinct I had screamed that this was manipulation, that Gabriel Stone was a criminal who couldn't be trusted, that accepting his offer would compromise every principle I'd built my life around. But when I looked at those photographs again, at the faces of children who had maybe 3 weeks before something unspeakable happened to them, principles felt like luxuries I couldn't afford. I need to think about it, I finally said. You have until tonight. Gabriel closed the folders, mercifully hiding those haunting images. But Grace, whether you help me or not, those people who want you dead will eventually find you. Running again just delays the inevitable. Working with me gives you protection and the chance to actually accomplish something before they do. I stood to leave, my mind churning with impossible choices. At the door, I turned back. Grayson, the boy at the shelter, is he safe? Marcus has assigned security to watch the shelter discreetly. If anyone comes looking for you there, we'll know. Gabriel's expression softened slightly. You made him a promise. Whatever else happens, I'll make sure you can keep it. That unexpected consideration did more to convince me of his sincerity than anything else he'd said. I left the study with the weight of those photographs burning in my memory, knowing that somewhere in that stack of impossible choices was a path that might actually lead to saving lives rather than just prolonging my own survival. I had until tonight to decide if I trusted Gabriel Stone enough to take it. I spent the rest of the morning in my room, pacing the narrow space while my mind raced through scenarios. Every option led to disaster. Trust Gabriel, and potentially become complicit in his criminal empire. Refuse his offer, and lose the chance to save those children in the photographs. Run again, and abandon Grayson to whatever system had already failed him once. Around noon, Marcus knocked on my door with a tray of food I hadn't requested. You should eat, he said simply, setting it down on my small desk. Decision-making requires calories. I studied him carefully. This man who'd watched me with Grayson, who'd gathered evidence that could destroy me, who now stood in my doorway with surprising gentleness in his expression. You could have edited that footage, I said quietly. You could have made me look like a threat, made it seem like I was manipulating that child. Why didn't you? Marcus hesitated at the doorway. Because I've been doing this job for 8 years, and I've learned to recognize the difference between performance and truth. What I saw at that shelter wasn't an act, and because... He stopped himself, then continued more carefully. Because Gabriel needs someone to remind him that not everything is a transaction. You might be that someone, if you're brave enough. After he left, I forced myself to eat, then made a decision that was probably reckless, but felt necessary. I left the mansion through the service entrance and headed to the shelter, half expecting Marcus's security team to stop me. They didn't. Either Gabriel had meant what he said about letting me keep my promise to Grayson, or this was a test to see if I would run. The shelter was quiet in the afternoon lull. I found Grayson in the same corner, but today he looked up when I entered. Recognition sparked in his eyes, small but unmistakable. Hi, sweetheart. I settled beside him with the familiar puzzle. I told you I'd come back. He nodded, a tiny movement that felt like a massive victory. Then, with careful deliberation, he picked up a puzzle piece and held it out to me. An offering, a gesture of trust that made my chest ache. We worked on the puzzle together, and gradually Grayson's rigid posture relaxed. He didn't speak again, but he stayed close to me, occasionally glancing up to make sure I was still there. After an hour, he did something that shattered my remaining defenses. He leaned his head against my shoulder, his small body trusting me to keep him safe. I wrapped my arm around him carefully, blinking back tears. This was why I'd risked everything. This was why I couldn't run again. Couldn't choose my safety over the children who needed protection. Grayson had already been failed by every system meant to keep him safe. I wouldn't add my name to that list of broken promises. I need to tell you something, I whispered, keeping my voice low. I might be going away for a little while to help keep you and other kids safe, but I promise I will come back. Even if it takes time. Even if things get complicated. I will find my way back to you. Okay? Grayson pulled back to look at me, his dark eyes serious beyond his years. Then he did something that broke me completely. He took my hand and placed it over his heart, then put his small hand over mine. A wordless promise, a connection that transcended language. When I returned to the mansion that evening, I went directly to Gabriel's study and knocked firmly. He opened the door himself, studying my expression with those calculating eyes. "I'll help you," I said without preamble. "But I have conditions." "Name them." "First, Grayson gets into a specialized trauma therapy program, the best available, with funding that doesn't disappear if I become inconvenient to you. Second, any children we recover from this auction get comprehensive support services, not just dumped back into the same broken foster system. Third, I want full transparency about your business operations that touch child welfare issues, and I want the authority to shut down anything problematic regardless of profit implications." Gabriel's eyebrow rose. "You're negotiating like you have leverage." "I have exactly one piece of leverage, and we both know what it is." I held his gaze steadily. "You need me because I understand these systems and you don't. You need me because I can identify the vulnerabilities in trafficking networks that your people can't see. And you need me because somewhere under that ruthless businessman exterior, you actually want to do the right thing, and you're not sure how. So yes, I'm negotiating. Take it or leave it." A slow smile spread across Gabriel's face, the first genuine expression I'd seen from him. "Marcus was right about you. You don't back down." "Do we have a deal?" "We have a deal, with one addition." He gestured to the chair I'd occupied that morning. "You mentioned wanting authority to audit my partner's activities. I'm giving you exactly that. As of tonight, you're my Director of Corporate Social Responsibility, a newly created position with comprehensive oversight and independent decision-making power. You'll have access to financial records, business dealings, anything you need to evaluate ethical implications. You're serious. Completely. I've spent years building an empire while deliberately not looking too closely at certain details. You're going to look at all of it, and then you're going to tell me what needs to change. Some things I can fix immediately. Others will require more careful maneuvering. But I'm tired of pretending that willful ignorance is the same as innocence. I should have been suspicious of how easily he agreed to my terms. I should have seen manipulation in his sudden corporate conscience. But there was something in Gabriel's expression, a weariness that suggested he'd been waiting for someone to call him on his compromises for a long time. "When do we start?" "Now." He pulled out a laptop and opened files that made my social worker's heart sink. Shell companies, offshore accounts, investment portfolios connected to businesses I recognized from my own investigations. "The auction is in 3 weeks. The man organizing it is Victor Reyes, one of my oldest business associates. We've done legitimate deals together for years, but I've always suspected his other activities crossed lines I wasn't willing to acknowledge. This auction proves it." I studied the financial documents, my mind already working through the patterns I'd learned to recognize. "These accounts here, they're layered to hide the origin of funds, classic money laundering structure, and these investment vehicles are designed to obscure ownership. He's not just organizing the auction, he's financing a significant portion of the network." "Can you trace it back to the source operations?" "Maybe, if I can access more detailed transaction records." I looked up at Gabriel. "But understanding the money trail isn't enough to stop the auction. We need to know the location, the security arrangements, the transportation methods for the children, and we need a plan that gets them out safely without alerting the entire network that we're coming. That's where my resources become useful." Gabriel pulled up architectural plans for what looked like a warehouse complex. "Victor owns several properties that could host this kind of event. I've already had Marcus eliminate the unlikely options. We're down to 3 possible locations." We worked through the night, Gabriel providing financial and logistical information, while I identified the operational patterns that marked trafficking activities. Around 3 in the morning, exhausted and running on coffee, I realized something that should have been obvious from the start. "You've done this before," I said quietly. "Not the auction specifically, but this kind of investigation. You know too much about how to track these operations." Gabriel was silent for a long moment, his expression shadowed in the study's dim lighting. "My younger sister was taken when she was 9 years old. Broad daylight, right outside our home. My father had enemies, people who thought hurting his children would hurt him more effectively than direct confrontation. They were right. Did you get her back? Not soon enough." His voice was flat, emotionless in the way that suggested enormous feeling buried beneath control. "We found her 8 months later, physically alive, but the girl she'd been was gone. She never recovered from what they did to her. She took her own life when she was 16. Understanding crashed over me. Why Gabriel had that unshakable line regarding children, why he'd spent his night researching my case instead of simply disposing of a problematic employee, why he was willing to risk his business relationships to stop this auction. "I'm sorry," I said inadequately. "Don't be sorry. Help me make sure other families don't get the phone call mine did." Gabriel closed his laptop with decisive finality. "We have 3 weeks to identify the location, plan the extraction, and coordinate with law enforcement contacts I trust not to be compromised. It's not enough time, but it's what we have. Then we'd better not waste it." Over the following days, we fell into an unlikely partnership. Gabriel provided resources and connections while I applied the investigative skills I'd developed as a social worker. Marcus coordinated surveillance on Victor Reyes and his known associates. Together we built a comprehensive picture of the trafficking network's operations. I continued visiting Grayson daily, and with Gabriel's funding, enrolled him in a specialized therapy program run by a trauma psychologist who understood the specific wounds trafficking left on children's psyches. Slowly, carefully, Grayson began to emerge from his silence. First more words, then short sentences, then actual conversations about his favorite dinosaurs and the puzzle we were still working on together. "You're good with him," Gabriel observed one evening after I'd returned from the shelter. He'd started joining me for dinner in the small dining room, our planning sessions extending into casual conversations that felt dangerously normal. "He's easy to be good with. He just needs someone to be consistent, to prove that adults can be trusted." I picked at my food, suddenly aware of how domestic this had all become. "What happens after the auction? Assuming we actually pull this off." "That depends on what you want to happen. I want to keep helping Grayson, and I want to keep doing this, identifying and stopping trafficking operations before they can hurt more children." "Then that's what we'll do." Gabriel's expression was serious, intent. I meant what I said about creating a foundation for this work. We can't save everyone, but we can save some, and maybe that's enough. It should have felt wrong, forming this partnership with a man whose empire was built on moral compromise, planning heroism funded by criminal profits. But as I watched Gabriel review security plans with the same intensity he probably applied to his other business ventures, I realized that people were capable of holding contradictions. He could be both ruthless and principled, dangerous and protective, morally gray while drawing absolute lines in specific places. "There's something you should know," I said suddenly, the words escaping before I could reconsider. The reason I was so certain about the trafficking connections in my agency. I was trafficked myself when I was 12. Only for 3 weeks before my grandmother figured out what my foster placement really was and got me out, but it was enough. I've spent my entire adult life trying to prevent other children from experiencing what I did. Gabriel set down his wine glass carefully, his full attention on me. "Grace, don't," I interrupted. "Don't apologize or look at me with pity. I'm telling you, because you need to understand that this isn't just professional for me. It's personal. It's the entire reason I exist. And that means I won't compromise or accept partial solutions or let political considerations override the safety of children. If that's a problem for our arrangement, tell me now. It's not a problem. Gabriel's voice was rough with emotion he didn't try to hide. It makes you exactly the person I need for this. Someone who understands what's at stake, who won't settle for comfortable half measures. 2 weeks into our planning, Marcus rushed into the study with news that made my blood run cold. We've identified the auction location, but there's a complication. The event is in 4 days, not 3 weeks. Victor moved up the timeline. Why? Gabriel was already on his feet, his calm facade cracking. Because someone tipped him off that he might be under investigation. He's accelerating his operations to minimize exposure risk. I felt the walls closing in. 4 days to finalize plans that needed weeks. 4 days before those children in the photographs faced horrors I couldn't let myself imagine. We're not ready. Then we get ready. Gabriel's expression hardened into something dangerous and focused. Marcus, contact our law enforcement allies. Tell them we have actionable intelligence on a major trafficking operation, and we need tactical support immediately. Grace, pull together everything you have on the network's operational patterns. We're going to need to brief people who won't have time for lengthy explanations. The next 4 days were a blur of planning, coordination, and constant anxiety. We identified the warehouse Victor was using, mapped security systems, coordinated timing with the police units Gabriel trusted. I barely slept, running on coffee and desperation, double-checking every detail because children's lives depended on getting this right. The night before the raid, Gabriel found me in the study at 2 a.m, surrounded by files and tactical plans. He didn't say anything, just sat down across from me and helped organize the chaos I'd created. What if we're wrong? I finally voiced the fear that had been gnawing at me. What if we raid the wrong location, or the timing is off, or Victor has contingencies we haven't anticipated? Then we adapt and try again. Gabriel's certainty was absolute. But we're not wrong, Grace. You've identified every pattern, accounted for every variable. Trust your expertise. I'm terrified, I admitted. Good. That means you understand what's at stake. He reached across the desk and took my hand, the gesture surprising in its gentleness. But you're not alone in this. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. I looked at our joined hands, a social worker and a crime lord, partnered in the most unlikely crusade either of us had ever undertaken. It was insane and probably doomed, but it was also the most right thing I'd done since the night I'd chosen to disappear rather than stop fighting. Together, I agreed. Tomorrow we would raid the auction. Tomorrow we would either save those children or fail spectacularly. Tomorrow would determine if Gabriel Stone's selective redemption and Grace Harmon's refusal to give up could actually make a difference in a world that seemed designed to crush both hope and innocence. The silent witness had spoken, and now it was time to see if anyone was truly listening. The warehouse district was silent at 3 a.m, abandoned buildings creating a maze of shadows, perfect for concealing both crime and intervention. I sat in the surveillance van with Marcus, watching thermal imaging screens while Gabriel coordinated tactical teams through his encrypted communication system. 3 vehicles arrived 20 minutes ago, Marcus reported, his voice professionally calm despite the tension vibrating through everyone present. Thermal reads indicate approximately 30 people inside the main warehouse structure, with the concentration suggesting they're gathered in the central area. I stared at the screens, each heat signature representing a person whose fate hung in balance tonight. Some of those signatures were smaller, child-sized, clustered together in a pattern that suggested cages or confinement. The sight made me want to vomit, but I forced myself to focus on the tactical details that would make the difference between rescue and disaster. Gabriel appeared at the van's entrance, dressed in black tactical gear that transformed him from businessman to something far more dangerous. The police teams are in position. They'll breach from the north and east entrances simultaneously. Our people will cover the exits to prevent anyone from escaping. And the children? I couldn't keep the fear from my voice. First priority, The moment we have control of the situation, medical teams move in for extraction. He met my eyes with fierce intensity. This is going to work, Grace. Trust the plan. But even the best plans couldn't account for every variable. We didn't know that Victor Reyes had installed a sophisticated early warning system, or that our approach had been detected 15 minutes before we breached. We didn't know that Victor had contingency protocols specifically designed for law enforcement raids. The tactical breach happened with military precision. Flashbangs, coordinated entry, overwhelming force designed to shock and control. For approximately 90 seconds, everything went exactly as planned. Police teams secured the perimeter, arrested confused auction attendees, moved toward the area where children were held. Then Victor's protocols kicked in, and everything fell apart. "Fire!" Marcus shouted as smoke began billowing from the warehouse. "He's torching the evidence." Gabriel was already moving, barking orders into his communication device. "Get those children out now. Medical teams move up. Forget the protocols, just get them out." I couldn't stay in the van. Every instinct I had screamed that children were dying while I sat safely watching screens. I was out the door before Marcus could stop me, running toward the warehouse entrance where police teams were evacuating confused and terrified victims. The smoke was thick, acrid, designed to spread quickly and destroy evidence before anyone could process the scene. Through the chaos, I heard children crying, their voices sharp with terror that transcended language or understanding. I followed that sound with single-minded determination, pushing past tactical officers who tried to redirect me. I found them in a storage room that Victor's people had apparently forgotten in their hurry to evacuate. 6 children, ages ranging from maybe 5 to 13, locked in cages and coughing violently from smoke inhalation. The sight triggered every trauma response I'd spent years learning to manage, but I shoved it down and focused on the locks. "It's okay," I told them in Spanish, then English, then the limited Korean I'd learned for cases involving immigrant families. "We're here to help. You're safe now." The locks were complex, designed to prevent exactly this kind of rescue. I fumbled with tools I barely knew how to use, precious seconds ticking away while smoke made breathing increasingly difficult. Then Gabriel was there, his bolt cutters making short work of what my improvised lockpicking couldn't accomplish. "Get them out," he ordered, already moving to the next cage. "Marcus has the medical teams waiting." Together we worked with desperate efficiency, cutting locks and carrying children who were too weak or traumatized to walk on their own. The smoke grew thicker, heat from the fire becoming oppressive, but we didn't stop until every cage was empty and every child was being carried toward safety. I was carrying a little girl, maybe 6 years old, who clung to me with desperate strength when I heard Gabriel shout. I turned to see him struggling with a final cage, the lock mechanism apparently jammed by heat damage, while structural supports above him groaned ominously. "Gabriel, get out," I screamed. "There's still a child in here," Marcus appeared, adding his strength to the effort, and together they managed to force the cage open. Gabriel pulled out a boy who couldn't have been older than 8, cradling him protectively as ceiling supports began to fail. What happened next seemed to occur in slow motion. The ceiling collapsed in a shower of burning debris, and Gabriel threw himself over the child, his body becoming a shield. Marcus grabbed them both, hauling them toward the exit as the room behind us became an inferno. We made it out with seconds to spare, collapsing onto the pavement while medical teams swarmed over us. The little girl I'd been carrying was pried from my arms by a paramedic who began immediate assessment. Around me, similar scenes played out as rescued children received urgent care. Gabriel lay a few feet away, still curled protectively around the boy he'd shielded, his back showing burns that had to be agonizing. But he didn't release the child until a paramedic gently convinced him that the boy needed medical treatment he couldn't provide through sheer protective instinct. "All children accounted for?" Gabriel's voice was raspy from smoke, but his focus remained absolute. "Yes, sir," Marcus confirmed, his own face streaked with soot. 17 children recovered total, all alive, all receiving medical treatment, I watched ambulances leave with their precious cargo, each one carrying away a child who would have faced unspeakable horror if not for tonight's intervention. We hadn't saved everyone. There would always be more auctions, more traffickers, more children at risk. But tonight, these 17 specific children would not become statistics in a system that had already failed them too many times. The aftermath was complicated in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. The raid made national news, but Gabriel's involvement was carefully obscured through legal maneuvering I didn't entirely understand. Officially, an anonymous tip had led police to the warehouse. The arrested attendees included several prominent businessmen and one sitting congressman, their names splashed across headlines as evidence mounted against them. Victor Reyes was found dead in the warehouse fire, which simplified certain aspects of the investigation while complicating others. Without him to testify, prosecutors had to build their case entirely on documentary evidence and the testimony of rescued children, a process that would take months and inflict its own trauma on victims who'd already endured too much. Gabriel spent 2 weeks recovering from his burns, refusing to stay in the hospital beyond necessary treatment. I visited daily, ostensibly to brief him on the children's progress, but really because I needed to assure myself he was okay. Our unlikely partnership had become something more during those frantic weeks of planning and the terrible night of execution. Something I wasn't ready to name but couldn't deny. "Grayson asked about you," I told him during one visit, settling carefully into the chair beside his bed. "He wanted to know if you were the man who helped save the other children." "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That you're complicated, but that you did something very brave and good." I studied Gabriel's face, looking for the ruthless crime lord I'd initially feared, and seeing only a man who'd thrown himself over a child he didn't know to protect him from fire. "He wants to meet you when you're feeling better." "I'm not good with children." "You literally used your body as a shield to save one. I think you're better with children than you give yourself credit for." I hesitated, then continued more carefully. "The foundation we talked about, I've been working on the structure with Marcus. We have commitments from several trauma therapists, legal experts willing to help with the prosecution side, and enough funding to support comprehensive services for at least 20 children initially. 20 is a good start." Gabriel shifted in bed, wincing at the movement. "But it's not enough. It's nowhere near enough." "No, it's not. But it's more than existed before." I reached for his hand, the gesture becoming natural between us. "We can't save everyone, Gabriel, but we can save some, and maybe that's enough to start." Over the following months, our foundation took shape with surprising speed. The 17 children from the warehouse raid became our first success stories, each placed in specialized care facilities or with trauma-informed foster families we'd carefully vetted. Grayson, who'd been languishing in the shelter system, moved into a therapeutic group home where he began to truly heal. And Gabriel, complicated, morally gray Gabriel Stone, systematically dismantled the parts of his business empire that couldn't withstand ethical scrutiny. Some partnerships ended quietly. Others required more aggressive separation. He used information from my audits to cut ties with associates whose activities extended into territories he could no longer ignore. "This is costing you," I observed one evening as we reviewed the latest financial reports. "Both money and influence." "Good." Gabriel's response was firm. "I've had enough of both for too long. Time to invest in something that actually matters." 6 months after the warehouse raid, we held our first foundation fundraiser, a carefully orchestrated event that brought together legitimate business people, politicians, and media attention focused on child trafficking prevention. Grayson attended as a special guest. No longer the silent, traumatized child I'd first met, but a boy beginning to reclaim his voice and his future. He gave a short speech, with my support, talking about what it meant to be saved by people who refused to give up on him. His words reduced half the audience to tears and generated donations that exceeded our most optimistic projections. Afterward, Gabriel found me on the balcony overlooking the event, both of us needing a moment away from the crowd. "Your foundation is going to change lives," I told him softly. "Our foundation. And I couldn't have built it without you showing me how." He turned to face me fully, his expression serious. "Grace, I need to tell you something. The night you agreed to help me, when you negotiated your terms and demanded transparency, that was the first time in years anyone had challenged me to be better than I was. You made me want to deserve your trust." "Gabriel, let me finish." He took my hands, his touch gentle despite the intensity in his eyes. "I've spent my adult life building walls, maintaining distance, refusing to care too much about anything that couldn't be controlled or calculated. You demolished every one of those walls without even trying. You just existed in your inconvenient, idealistic, absolutely infuriating way, and suddenly none of my careful defenses mattered anymore." My heart was pounding, but I stayed quiet, letting him continue. "I'm not good at this. I'm probably going to be terrible at relationships, because I've spent years actively avoiding anything that made me vulnerable. But I want to try. With you. If you're willing to take a chance on someone who's still figuring out how to be decent." I thought about all the reasons this was a terrible idea. The power imbalance, his criminal connections, the complicated moral territory we inhabited together. But I also thought about Gabriel throwing himself over a child to shield him from fire. About his absolute line regarding hurting children. About the way he'd transformed his empire rather than compromise the principles I'd challenged him to develop. "I'm willing to try," I said finally. "But I need you to understand something. I'm never going to stop pushing you, never going to accept easy compromises when children's safety is at stake. I'm going to be inconvenient and idealistic and absolutely infuriating for as long as we're doing this. I wouldn't want you any other way." Gabriel pulled me closer, his smile genuine and unguarded in a way I'd never seen before. "You're my conscience, Grace Harmon. The voice that reminds me I'm capable of being more than what I was." Inside the ballroom, Grayson was laughing at something Marcus had said. His joy, a testament to the resilience of children when given the space and support to heal. Tomorrow we would continue the difficult work of dismantling trafficking networks and supporting survivors. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new compromises, new impossible choices. But tonight, standing on this balcony with Gabriel's arms around me and the sound of Grayson's laughter drifting through the open doors, I let myself believe that sometimes the most unlikely partnerships could create the most significant change. That selective redemption was still redemption. That one saved child was worth every sacrifice required to protect them. The silent witness had spoken, and his words had started a revolution that neither of us could have predicted. Not perfect justice, but something real and tangible and worth fighting for with everything we had. We couldn't save everyone, but we would save some. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. 3 years after the warehouse raid, the Foundation for Child Protection and Recovery operated out of a restored building in downtown Chicago, its modern glass architecture a stark contrast to the broken systems it worked to repair. I stood in my corner office, our corner office, really, since Gabriel had long since stopped maintaining separate spaces, reviewing case files for the quarterly board meeting. The knock on the door was familiar, and I looked up to see Grayson, now 10 years old, and radiating the confidence of a child who'd reclaimed his future. He wore his school uniform with the casual pride of someone who'd earned the right to normal childhood experiences. "Mom said you wanted to see me." He'd started calling me Mom about 6 months ago, a designation that still made my chest tight with gratitude and responsibility. "Your teacher sent your progress report." I pulled out the document, fighting a smile. "Apparently, you're exceptionally gifted in mathematics and showing remarkable leadership skills with your peers. Care to explain why you organized a fundraiser for the foundation without telling us?" Grayson had the grace to look slightly sheepish. "I saw the news story about the new case, the 12 kids from the warehouse in California. I thought maybe if my class raised money, it could help pay for their therapy or something. And you raised how much? $3,000. The principal said it was the most successful student fundraiser in the school's history. His pride was impossible to miss and completely justified. I pulled him into a hug. This child who'd transformed from traumatized silence into an advocate for others still trapped in darkness. Your father is going to be insufferably proud of you, you know. Dad's always proud of me. It's kind of annoying. But Grayson's grin suggested he didn't find it annoying at all. Gabriel's adoption of Grayson had been finalized 2 years ago, shortly after our wedding. A small ceremony attended by the foundation staff, the children we'd helped save, and Marcus, who'd served as Gabriel's best man with obvious satisfaction. Creating a family from the wreckage of trafficking and tragedy felt simultaneously impossible and absolutely right. Our marriage was unconventional in ways that raised eyebrows among people who knew Gabriel's background. I'd maintained absolute veto power over any business dealings that crossed ethical lines, a power I'd exercised more than once despite the financial costs. Gabriel had restructured his entire empire around legitimate enterprises, using his considerable influence to combat the same systems he'd once indirectly supported. It wasn't perfect. We still disagreed constantly about tactics, about acceptable compromises, about the pace of change. But those disagreements came from shared values, rather than fundamental opposition. We both wanted to protect children, to dismantle trafficking networks, to create systems that actually serve the vulnerable rather than exploiting them. "There's something else," Grayson said, suddenly serious. "I want to testify at the California trial. I know I'm not one of those kids, but I thought maybe if I talked about what recovery looks like, it might help the jury understand why they need to send those guys to prison forever." I exchanged glances with Gabriel, who'd entered the office quietly during our conversation. He looked different from the man I'd first met, still powerful, still commanding, but with a softness around his eyes that suggested he'd learned to care without apology. "That's a big decision," Gabriel said carefully, settling into the chair beside Grayson. "Testifying means talking about difficult things in front of strangers. Are you sure you're ready?" "I've been doing therapy for 3 years. I can talk about it now without falling apart." Grayson's determination was absolute. "And besides, you and Mom taught me that protecting other kids is worth being uncomfortable. Those 12 kids need someone to show the jury that recovery is possible, that putting their traffickers in prison actually matters." "He gets that idealistic stubbornness from you," Gabriel told me with obvious affection. "And the strategic thinking from you," I countered. "Grayson, if you want to testify, we'll support you completely. But we're also going to make sure you have extra therapy sessions around the trial, and Marcus will be with you the entire time for security. I know, I trust you guys to keep me safe." Grayson stood, clearly ready to return to whatever homework awaited him. "Oh, and Dad? The school wants you to speak at Career Day about business ethics. I told them you'd probably say yes." After Grayson left, Gabriel pulled me into his arms with the easy familiarity of years together. "Our son is going to change the world. Our son is already changing the world, just like his parents." I leaned into his embrace, grateful for the impossible journey that had brought us here. "The board meeting starts in an hour. Are you ready?" The quarterly board meetings had become significant events, attended by politicians, law enforcement officials, child welfare experts, and major donors who'd bought into our mission. Today's meeting was particularly important. We were presenting the results of our largest intervention yet, a coordinated operation across 5 states that had identified and dismantled a trafficking network operating through fraudulent adoption agencies. The operation had taken 18 months of investigation, required coordination with multiple federal agencies, and resulted in the rescue of 47 children and the arrest of 36 traffickers and facilitators. It was exactly the kind of large-scale impact I'd once believed impossible from outside traditional systems. Gabriel opened the meeting with statistics and outcomes, his businessman's precision lending credibility to work that could have seemed purely emotional. I followed with individual case studies, giving voice to the children who'd been saved and the comprehensive support systems we'd built to help them heal. This operation cost approximately $4 million, Gabriel concluded, displaying financial breakdowns that showed exactly where every dollar had gone. The return on that investment is 47 children who will now have the chance to reclaim their futures. 47 opportunities to prevent the kind of generational trauma that perpetuates these cycles. The board members, some of whom had initially been skeptical of Gabriel's transformation from criminal to advocate, nodded with obvious respect. We'd proven over 3 years that selective redemption could become comprehensive change, that one man's decision to be better could ripple outward in ways that saved lives. After the meeting, Marcus found us in my office, his expression suggesting news we wouldn't like. We've identified another network, bigger than anything we've tackled before. International scope. Connections to organized crime in 6 countries. Estimated victim count in the hundreds. I felt the familiar weight of impossible responsibility settle onto my shoulders. Every case we solved revealed 10 more. Every child we saved reminded us of countless others still trapped in darkness. The work would never be finished, never be enough, never reach everyone who needed protection. "Tell me about it," Gabriel said, already pulling out his laptop to begin documenting what would likely become our next major operation. That night, after Marcus had briefed us on the new network and left us with files that would fuel nightmares, I found Gabriel on our home office balcony, staring out at the city lights. He held 2 glasses of wine, offering me one as I joined him. "Some days this feels impossible," he admitted quietly. "We dismantle one network and discover 3 more. We save 47 children and learn about hundreds still in danger. How do we keep fighting when the problem is so much bigger than we are?" "The same way we've always done it." I took his hand, intertwining our fingers. "One case at a time. One child at a time. One impossible intervention that somehow becomes possible because we refuse to give up." "That's very idealistic of you." I learned it from someone who used his body as a shield to protect a child he didn't know. Someone who dismantled his own empire because it couldn't withstand ethical scrutiny. Someone who chose to be better, even though easier options were always available. I turned to face him fully. "You taught me that redemption is possible, Gabriel. Even selective redemption that doesn't fix everything. Even compromise that still saves lives. You taught me that imperfect heroism is better than paralyzed perfectionism. And you taught me that principles matter more than profits, that some lines should never be crossed regardless of cost, that one person's refusal to compromise can actually change systems." Gabriel pulled me closer, his embrace solid and real. "I never thought I'd be this person, someone who cares more about saving children than accumulating power. But you made me want to deserve the faith you had in me." Below us, the city continued its complicated existence. Crime and kindness existing side by side. Systems failing and people persevering. Darkness threatening but never quite extinguishing the light that people like us fought to protect. Somewhere in that city, Grayson slept safely in his room, his nightmares gradually fading as healing did its slow, patient work. Somewhere in protected shelters, 47 children were beginning their own recovery journeys, supported by resources we'd fought to provide. Somewhere in the shadows, more children waited for rescue that might never come. We couldn't save everyone, but we would save some. And in the end, as I stood on that balcony with Gabriel's arms around me and the weight of tomorrow's impossible choices already pressing down, I realized that selective redemption had become something more comprehensive than either of us had imagined. Not perfect justice, but real progress. Not complete victory, but meaningful wins that accumulated into systemic change. The silent witness had spoken 3 years ago. 2 desperate words that had started a revolution. "Don't leave." Grayson's plea had become our mission statement. Our promise to every child trapped in darkness. We won't leave. We won't give up. We won't stop fighting until you're safe. Some promises were impossible to keep perfectly, but we would keep them anyway. Imperfectly, but absolutely. For as long as we had breath and resources, and stubborn refusal to accept that children's suffering was inevitable. Gabriel pressed a kiss to my temple, and I felt the solid reality of our improbable family, our complicated redemption, our ongoing battle against systems designed to exploit vulnerability. Tomorrow, we start planning the international operation, he murmured. Tomorrow we save more children. Tomorrow we try again, even though it's impossible. Especially because it's impossible. We stood together as the city lights flickered below us. Two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built something worth protecting from the wreckage of their separate traumas. Not perfect partners, but real ones. Not flawless heroes, but persistent ones. The work would continue tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. Some cases we'd solve. Others would slip through our fingers despite our best efforts. But every child saved was worth every compromise required, every difficult choice, every impossible intervention that somehow became possible through sheer stubborn determination. The silent witness had spoken, and his words had changed everything. We were listening. We would always be listening. And we would never stop fighting to make sure more children found their voices, reclaimed their futures, and learned that promises made by people like us were promises kept. Imperfectly, but absolutely, for as long as it took. That was enough. It had to be enough. So we would make it enough, one saved child at a time, until the impossible became merely difficult. And the difficult became the reality we refused to accept any other alternative to achieving. Together. Always together. In the complicated space between selective redemption and comprehensive change, we'd found our purpose, our family, and our future. And Grayson slept safely, dreaming of mathematics and fundraisers and a life he'd been given back through the efforts of people who'd learned that sometimes the most profound transformations begin with a single witness who finally finds the courage to speak.